Hello, everyone. This is Peter Zemsky coming to you live from Fontainebleau, France. And we have an amazing conversation linking up with the San Francisco Bay Area today. So this is part of our San Francisco Hub series. And we really went to the San Francisco Hub for a lot of alumni-centric reasons. First of all, the move was paid for by some generous alumni donors. Secondly, we had really an amazing dynamic alumni community in the Bay Area that we could tap into. And finally, there was a lot of interest in bringing to our global alumni community the conversations, the insights from what is still the leading innovation ecosystem in the world. And Geoff Ralston really, I think, exemplifies all three. Next slide, please. So Geoff is one of the key donors for the San Francisco Hub, a real pillar of the dynamic alumni association out there. And when we did the opening just late February, there's Geoff as one of our featured speakers. And it's a real pleasure to be able to bring that conversation to our global alumni community. Hey, Geoff, thanks for starting the day with us. Did you get your coffee?
I have my coffee.
Look at that. Ooh, is that Pete's?
That is a Pete's coffee, yes.
Awesome. Anyway, so Geoff, you've obviously over the last few years, you've been really generous. You've come out to campus quite often and talked to the students, but possibly many of the global alumni don't know you as well. So let's just start by getting some sense of how you got to be president of Y-Combinator. If I went back to 1992 and met you as a student at INSEAD, would I have a sense that you were going to be first, a successful entrepreneur, creating Yahoo Mail, selling a music business to Steve Jobs at Apple? What would I have seen?
All of that, it would have been obvious, right? The, when I went to INSEAD in 92, I had spent my entire career at Hewlett Packard. And I started off as a programmer, as an engineer there, and gradually evolved to being a manager in a group and doing a few different things, but I was certainly in a period of transition. I'm not sure how many of folks who went through the MBA program at INSEAD feel that way, but I think a lot do. It was sort of a moment in time where, you're sort of rethinking things. It's a little, people tend to go to INSEAD and do their MBA a little bit later in life than perhaps some folks who go to HBS or Harvard Business School.
And yet right afterwards, you ended up back at HP, at least briefly.
Well, yeah, I mean, so I think, it was a complicated time because I think a lot of us are trying to shift our career and change the trajectory. And immediately after leaving INSEAD, I had to make this decision as to whether I stay in the United States or stay in France or go back to the United States. I'd been in France for 5 years. And when I went back to the United States, I kind of went back to HP as a default. And that was actually a difficult time. It felt hard. And it took me a little while to say, oh, I need to do something different. And I was, I guess, lucky in the sense that the thing that sort of knocked me out of the sort of depressing road that I was on going back to HP and not having really shifted that trajectory was the emergence of the World Wide Web, which, Tim Berners-Lee had just finished creating at CERN just down the street from where I had been working in global. But then I went home and ran into it, even though I was way farther away from where the genesis happened. A friend called me up and said, hey, you should check out Mosaic. And I said, what's that? And he said, I don't really know, but you should check it out. And I quit my job about 3 weeks later. After
you booted up Mosaic, and you saw that this could change everything in a way. Or?
It changed everything for me. I've been dreaming about sort of the ability of what would become a worldwide network very quickly to change everything, really. I believed in that for a long time. And when I saw it, I knew that I believed anyway that this was, it wasn't so obvious at the time. I still remember driving around Northern California, around Palo Alto with my girlfriend, my now wife. And every once in a while you'd see a URL on a sign, and I would stop and say, look, it's real. And she would just roll her eyes. Yeah, whatever.
Was that?
But yeah, it took some real belief then, and that's really what changed things for me. I became an entrepreneur. I started some companies. Eventually, one of those companies was sold to Yahoo to create Yahoo Mail, and I spent a bunch of time at Yahoo. And it was we sold our company called 4-in-1, which built Rocket Mail, which turned into Yahoo Mail in 1997. And in 1998, Yahoo bought another company called ViaWeb, which it was really the first SaaS company. We all know what SaaS is now, but they were really the first one. It was an online shopping cart for people who wanted to create online stores, and that became Yahoo Stores. And the founders of that were Paul Graham, Robert Morris, and Trevor Blackwell, who were about 8 years later the founders of Y-Combinator. And that's how I got to know Paul Graham. Paul Graham was really the spirit, the intellectual force behind Y-Combinator, and he founded it with again his co-founders from ViaWeb and his girlfriend at the time, now wife, Jessica Livingston, and those four started YC in 2005. Well, I was still at Yahoo, but I got to know Paul really well back in the day. And when I left Yahoo in 2006, I started hanging out with Paul again, and eventually we reconnected. And I founded a company and joined YC simultaneously in 2011. I founded Imagine K-12, which was an educational technology version of YC. Became a partner at Paul's urging at YC because, well, he was recruiting me to be a partner there, and also it was obviously going the best in the world at accelerating startup companies and helping startup companies be successful. And I knew that would help me in Imagine K-12. And eventually Imagine K-12 and YC merged together in 2016. And so I've been at YC since 2011 and took over as president just a year ago.
So everyone's heard of YC. It's the original, and I guess you'd argue still leading incubator accelerator.
I think I would argue that. Yeah.
You would even, yeah. What makes it so special? What does it take to really sustain that leadership position?
Sometimes I think when people ask me what makes YC successful, it's sort of a similar question to what makes Silicon Valley special. Why does Silicon Valley keep on creating the great technology startups in the world? And the answer is that it's a number of things. Probably the most important thing that YC has is a network of founders and companies that's unmatched in the world. We've funded close to 2,500 companies with over 5,000 founders, and that network reinforces itself and builds and helps everyone within it be successful. But it's broader than that. It's more than that. It's the deep understanding of how you can improve a startup's probability of success that comes from our founders. From a lot of people originally did YC because they followed Paul Graham's writing, the essays he wrote about starting a startup and about how you can improve your chances of making it in a really difficult environment. Every time you start a startup, every startup that has to find its way and somehow find its way from 1 or 2 or 3 people to becoming a billion-dollar company, that road is complex and hard and arduous, and making it successfully along that road is something that I would say we know better than anyone else. So I think we're in the right place. We are very good at helping startups, and our network is a huge, powerful force multiplier for all of our startups. Amongst the things that make YC successful are those.
I mean, we have one question. I mean, again, it's been imitated so much, and really, is that just flattery? Is it the sort of thing that keeps you guys up at night, or all that imitation?
When YC was founded, the venture community thought this is a direct quote, a cute idea. It wasn't taken very seriously, and for a long time. And that's actually really good because it breeds a kind of paranoia. And I think that's part of our culture is to worry about competition and worry about what actually could have could be negative for our ability to do what we do in the future. I worry a little bit less about all the imitators. I worry about how, because we're in almost a monopoly position. If you're going to do an accelerator, you're going to choose YC first. And that's great, but it makes us nervous because when you're in that sort of position, you're always vulnerable to things that you don't expect. So we have to figure out how to expect what we're not expecting. What's going to change? What's going to be different?
Like a global pandemic, maybe.
But yeah, you know, when I took over this job, that wasn't in the job description for sure. That was a bit of a surprise. I've mentioned to you earlier, I feel a little bit like Obama coming in as president in the midst of a crisis. His job was perhaps tougher. Maybe running the United States is a little bit harder, especially because he came in the middle of a global financial crisis, and I had a few months before my crisis hit. But it is an added challenge, and I'm sure everyone in the audience is feeling that challenge today.
Actually, before I want to go right there in just a second, Geoff, but maybe just one more background question. Tell us a little bit, what's the role of the president in Y-Combinator? It's a non-traditional organization. You've actually got a small staff, but a huge network. And how do you see your role as president, maybe?
You know, even though we're small, we're well under 100 people, we actually have a fairly complex organization. We have a bunch of different groups. We have our core accelerator, the program that runs a little bit like a university twice a year. So we have 2 promotions a year, like INSEADer. Ours are only 3 months long, but we also have a venture arm. We have we started raising funds in 2015 for growth investments, and so we've done that several times since then. So we have an organization that makes growth investments. We have a software team. We have finance and legal teams. We have initiatives. We have an initiative that works on helping our companies raise Series A's. We have another educational initiative called Startup School that has actually just launched a new program yesterday, which is now a continuous program as opposed to once a year. So we have a whole bunch of different organizations, and whenever you have a whole bunch of different organizations, someone has to coordinate between them. And I think the easiest way for me to describe my job is that I make sure that everyone can do their job as effectively as possible. And so my job is, more than anything else, to remove barriers for people to be able to be as effective as possible. But you know, obviously the buck has to stop somewhere at a company, and that's my role as well.
Well, as a good INSEADer alum, we're glad that you're wrestling with lots of diversity in your environment. Lots of different.
Well, diversity is an interesting point as well, because not only in the environment, but in the diversity is the kind of the word of choice of what's going on in the United States. That right in the middle of a global pandemic, we're obviously having massive protests and a massive conversation about racial injustice in the United States. You know, and this is something that's been on our minds for a long time, because we think that entrepreneurship can actually make the world a much better place, and it can really add power to communities. Wherever there's entrepreneurship in a community, that entire community does better and better. And so it's super important for us to help underrepresented founders, whether they be people of color or women, to create successful entrepreneurship examples for the rest of the community, so that you know, that actually can make a difference. And this is a conversation that is, you know, redoubled in import within YC, obviously with everywhere with the United States. And you know, I know I don't know how it feels from abroad, looking at what's going on in the United States, and I know it's spread. Some of that disruption and the protests have spread around the world, and some of it is certainly focused on the immediate cause, which was police brutality and racism within police departments. But it's much broader than that, and that's really a reflection of a broader issue within our society, which obviously we're part of and are thinking hard about.
Yeah, so clearly systemic. Actually, let's go to how you're adapting. And I was going to save this for later, but why don't we go on the inclusion piece first, since you brought it up. You've just had, I guess, a June intake. You've had your summer intake, and so one piece of that is going to be, I guess, digital. But already, going back to what you raised, what do you guys try and do around inclusion and meeting some of those growing expectations or just desire to contribute?
Yeah, it's actually a struggle for us because we are at the mercy of our applicant pool. We have an applicant pool, and we fund them, and we have not just a fiduciary duty, but a duty to our company to fund the very best companies we can. And so that's what we do. It's almost impossible for us to control the makeup of the batch based on what our applicant pool is. So one of the things we do is to try to improve the diversity within our applicant pool. We go out and talk to historically Black colleges, for example. We do office hours explicitly for women to try to persuade them that entrepreneurship is a viable career path for women, where for whatever societal reason that doesn't seem to be as common as it is for men.
It's very funny.
Also,
often listening to you talk about YC, I'm often reminded of the parallels with a business school, right? When people ask me,
sure,
what are you doing about inclusion? It's much more comfortable to go out and improve your applicant pool than to change decisions in some ways. And I guess even more so for you, where again, you have investors as well who are putting the money up.
Well, and it's worse than that for us than for a school, because if we fund people for diversity reasons as opposed to because we think they have a better chance of success, they're going to fail, right? I mean, it is a very difficult path, entrepreneurship, and funding the wrong people doesn't help them, doesn't help their communities. And so, whereas you can make the argument that just getting people, perhaps a more diverse student body is an overall good thing. So we need to find ways to help underrepresented folks be more successful. For example, one thing we'd like to do is find, I should back up. If you look at 2005, at the insights that Paul and Jessica and Trevor and Robert had in creating Y-Combinator, it was that companies are going to be created around technology. Software in particular would drive value creation. So let's bring the people who know that subject, who are technologists, who are hackers, and make them the center of that value creation. Let them start the companies. So one of the things we need to do is get underrepresented people in computer science departments, get women in computer science departments. At my alma mater before INSEAD, two before INSEAD at Dartmouth, recently there was a majority of the computer science department that was women, and that's fantastic. We'd like to see the same thing for people of color. Get people of color, get underrepresented groups creating, and then they will create companies, and then they'll have the opportunities that entrepreneurship represents. So we're actually having an active conversation about what more we can do along those lines to make a difference. And I guess that's what we can come back and talk about. How can we make a difference?
Yeah. Some of these tech and society questions, but maybe let's go in to operating today. So we struggle with teaching on Zoom. I guess you actually do a lot of, in some ways, education and socialization of founders. You've just had your summer batch come in. I guess two parts of questions. When I see people asking, how are you adapting what you choose based on the current environment and what you expect? So was it already shaping your thinking about who to admit to YC for the summer? And then any experience about how you're actually running the program with current constraints?
Well, if I might back up a little bit, because the pandemic actually started in the middle of our winter batch. So our winter batch runs from January to March. The batches culminate in an investor demo day. So it runs from January to March and June to August. And so we were just coming towards the end of our batch in March, and the investor demo day takes place in Pier 48 in San Francisco. And Pier 48 in San Francisco is a giant building because there's so much demand. It's 2 days long because we have so many companies that are presenting, and there's over 1,000 investors that come each day. And
what day was this in March? Which day of March? What day in March?
Well, it's usually about March 20th, 21st, around that time frame, depending on when the Monday and Tuesday. It's a Monday and Tuesday in March, whenever that falls. So it's usually about the third week in March, and you know, there's over 1,000 people there. There's an online version as well, always, and another 1,500 or 2,000 people consume Demo Day online anyway. But there we were. So it was the very beginning of March. I remember we had the West Coast Hub in late February, and even then, you know, I talked to my wife because we went to it and said, we actually asked ourselves, should we go to the opening? All these international people coming in, there's this pandemic happening, and we didn't know that much about it, but in February, but we really questioned whether we were going to even go.
It was already there all around us, but yes.
Well, it was already there all around us. And in fact, it was interesting because it was one of the first places where we went to the West Coast Hub, and they actually took our temperature before they would let us in. So we knew it was real, but still, if you remember, Peter, there was finger food and people were hugging and you know, shaking hands, and it wasn't that serious. And you know, here's what happened in the Bay Area. On March 8th, I was in Southern California playing in a Pro-Am tennis tournament prior to one of the biggest tennis tournaments in the world, the BNP Paribas Open. It was an amazing thing. There were tennis players from around the world. There was a party the Saturday night before it. There was finger food even then, people hugging, a few people going like that, but not that much. We played on 6 o'clock on Sunday. I hopped on a plane to come back to Northern California, planning to come back to the tournament, which I do every year, 3 or 4 days later to, you know, it's one of my favorite things to do every year. By the time the plane landed, the tournament had been canceled. And that week, the world fell apart. And that week, we had some hard decisions to make. And we said, first of all, we have this batch going on, our school, and we had 3 meetings left, our sort of send off for them prior to Demo Day, well, 2 prior to Demo Day and then 1 after Demo Day, where we have hundreds of founders all coming together in a building. We canceled all of those, said, can't do them all. We're going to do them all virtually. And then we had a hard decision to make about Demo Day, which was coming up in just 2 weeks. And we said, not doing it in person, can't have 1,000 people from around the world together. It's not going to happen. So we made our Demo Day all virtual, pulled it up a week, because we realized things are only going to get worse and worse and worse in the investing environment and everything. So we pulled it up a week, made it entirely virtual, rewrote all the software for it within that next week, and blasted off into the end of the batch that way. And
Wow.
And it was exciting. And by the way, one more thing is, on Wednesday of that week, we decided that our office would now be 100% virtual, and we'd close down the office. And so kind of brutally, and I know many of the folks in the audience had the same sort of experience. We went from being sort of normal in the office, everyone there, to, oh, we're all virtual, all on Zoom all the time. That's it. And then it was a progression to the summer batch, where we normally, the normal way that we fund companies is we have an online application, our applicant pool. And then we do a further screening. Now, sometimes we do video interviews to further screen, yeah. but every company that gets in the YC has an actual interview with 3 or 4 partners, and it's always in person. It used to be always in Mountain View. In the last couple of years, we've started doing them on site. So I went to Paris last year and interviewed a bunch of companies. Not this year. We were going to. It was all planned. I was supposed to be in Paris again. We were going to do it in Sao Paulo and in Bangalore. And in fact, we canceled all of those and all of the interviews in Mountain View. And every interview we did was by Zoom.
Yeah. All right. So one of the things everyone's asking, we were discussing this before, is, okay, what's going to stick? Will you be more open to video interviewing, or do you think you're going to go back and do it all in person?
So we're 3 months in. We've done 1 round of video interviews once in the entire existence of YC, and we've just launched our summer batch. It launched the first week in June, which is an entirely virtual batch. And so we're holding office hours by Zoom. By the way, we've done that. I've done hundreds of office hours by video anyway, because sometimes it's just more convenient to do it. It was always by Skype before, but now it's always by Zoom. Zoom's better than Skype, obviously. So there were, like I mentioned, our demo day was always virtual. There was always a virtual component, but now it's all virtual. Our batch always had a little bit of virtual in it, but now it's all virtual. What is going to stick is such a deep, important question. One way we're looking at this is an enormous opportunity. An enormous opportunity for us to understand what we can do virtually and what we ought to do virtually. There is huge power in human beings being together in a room. I was saying, I'm actually going into the office today with 3 other people to have a meeting because we have some really tough stuff to work through, and it's just better in person. Zoom's fantastic, and these meetings are good, but there's certain things you want to do in person, and we will certainly move back once the pandemic ends to certain things in person, but this will have a lasting effect on YC. Zoom interviews were great. They're not as good as in person, but they were great. And we will integrate that into our process forever. I don't know if we'll ever go to Bangalore or Paris again to do interviews when we can do them by Zoom, because, as you guys all know, it's super time consuming, expensive, tiring, difficult to coordinate to actually travel to another country, to travel long distances, and meetings are super efficient like this. So this will have unquestionably lasting effect on our business and businesses around the world, for sure.
What I want to do is let's make this, I've been pulling some questions off the audience, but let's make this a little more interactive. I'm going to launch a poll now. First, just a warm-up poll, which is really what are you guys seeing in terms of the impact of the pandemic on digital transformation in your organization? Obviously, like Geoff says, there's a lot of push to do things more digitally. At the same thing, I see in traditional organizations also budgets are slashed, and sometimes it's harder to invest in digital. So with that as a setup, to what extent is it just a clear acceleration for you, or is it more mixed? And we're going to take a look what people are saying, at least in this sample here.
I think
so we'll take a look at this in a second. And then I guess Geoff, I do want to push you a little bit in terms, because you have to make calls, not only on who do you let in, but as you said, you guys have a growth fund, right? So you've got a whole portfolio of companies, and you've got to make some calls about where you double down on investments. So first of all, let's open this up. And so again, at least in the group here, a lot of acceleration, and then the rest of the other half more mixed. Actually, one thing, well, Geoff, what I suggest.
Well, I guess I'm just looking at the poll here, Peter, and it's a slam dunk. It's like, this is accelerating. Like, what is like almost 90% are being accelerated. Of course, I mean, we're sitting here paying order of magnitude $1 million a year in rent in San Francisco. Like, why? You have to ask yourself that wherever you are, we're paying all this rent, and boy, in some ways we're way more efficient at home. And do we need that big an office? Does everyone need to be there? So you ask the most basic questions of how you run your organization, and you look at how effective people are. Now, there's certainly, we're doing a ton of work to hold the company together, because it was brutal. We actually have 2 companies we funded that someday I think will IPO. One's called GitLab and one's called Zapier. 2 amazing companies, very successful companies, have been 100% remote since day one. They've worked on it. They've never had an office. Neither one of these companies, and these companies are going to go IPO as entirely remote organizations. But for us and for so many of the people in your audience, it was brutal. It was 1 week we were not remote, and then we're remote, and we have to figure out how to do that. So we're doing lots of things to figure out how to, keep people happy and energized and productive while they're at home. And so we're learning a lot about doing that, but also asking the question, why this seems to work pretty well. Why should we change, or how should we change, or how much should we change? So I think it's unquestionable that you can see this in the audience polls that
Actually, why don't we throw a qualitative question out at the audience, which is just around, I mean, what I'm going to ask Geoff in a second, but what do you guys, do you think the changes you're seeing in your organization today will stick? And if so, how? So you can, if people have a perspective on that, you can throw that into the Q&A and we'll take a look at it. But Geoff, I don't know, just if I step back, this sounds like it could be amazing for entrepreneurship, right? If you're talking about fundamental changes in behavior and shifts, this is usually the stuff of entrepreneurship. Is that what you're seeing? Is that what you're predicting?
We have over 220 companies in our summer batch. And we received about 12,500 applications. People see opportunity everywhere. And when the world is fully disrupted, that opportunity doubles and triples and quadruples. Now, that doesn't mean there's not more challenges. Some venture capitalists will reduce the amount of money they put to work because they're worried about how the economy is going to come back, right? There's at least a V and maybe a U effect of the economic downturn. That being said, the smart venture capitalists are super excited because they understand that there will be some epic companies built on the changes that have gone on. Even if you look at the existing company, we look at our portfolio, there's a number of companies. It almost sounds crass to talk about it this way because COVID has been such a disaster and, personal disasters for so many people who've lost loved ones or had been ill, or lost businesses. It's been terrible. But there's a set of businesses, especially digital businesses, who have done remarkably well in the midst of the pandemic. There's just news today of one of our companies, DoorDash, which is a food delivery company in the United States that is just doing incredibly well. Another company called Instacart, who does home delivery of groceries, doing incredibly well. Our most valuable company, Stripe.
Customer acquisition costs are suddenly Zippo, right? So
right, Stripe, which is our most valuable company, the payment company, is clearly there's the economic downturn will affect them, but so much is going digital. That's what they do. So there's a set of companies for whom this is going to be a remarkable opportunity, existing and new. And, hopefully, I think we can be hopeful in the sense that the world can get better because of this. Some of this kind of meeting can be way more positive. I don't know about folks out there, but I see my siblings more now than I ever did before, because we said, oh, let's have Zoom meetings. And it's easier to do webinar. Like, I might not have done this before because I would have had to go to Paris probably, or Fontainebleau. And there's opportunities here that are positive. And when we come out of this, I think that's what, gives me hope and excitement for the future, because things can get better and we can learn. I think our company is going to be way better and more interesting and be able to fund more companies that do better and better around the world. Thanks. Again, it sounds almost crass to say that, but thanks to the effects of the pandemic.
Actually, I'm going to start pulling some questions. We got some really interesting questions coming that will lead the conversation in different places. One is around investors. So again, one thing is just around a little bit digging in what you're seeing in terms of the investment environment for early stage and later stage, but also even a little bit, how do you equip your founders to deal with VC investors? And what do you tell them behind closed doors about dealing with that community?
We've written a lot about investing. If anyone's thinking of starting a startup, one of the I think timeless essays is Paul Graham's How to Start a Startup that he wrote in 2005, which, by the way, was the genesis of starting YC, because he gave a talk at the Harvard Computer Society. A bunch of programmers called How to Start a Startup, turned that into an essay, and then turned that essay into Y-Combinator. And there's a lot that talks about how do you think about raising money. But it is different now how you think about raising money. One of the things we always tell founders, we tell it with more intensity now, is that when you raise money, you should consider the money you've raised to be the last money you'll ever raise. And make sure that, to the extent possible, you organize your company so that can be true if it needs to be true. For successful companies, it generally won't be. But if you do that, then your probability of survival is higher. Well, in today's environment, venture capital will be more of a challenge. There will be a lot of capital available, but it won't flow as easily. And there will be a bunch of firms who are really nervous and who will invest in fewer companies. The best firms will probably crank up how much money they put in, but a lot of firms will be nervous. But also there's a timing thing going on here. As any company that has a portfolio of investments, we looked at that portfolio hard, met with all of our companies and talked to them about how to make it through COVID successfully and how to make it through the downturn. And that takes up your time and your attention, and venture capitalists are doing that too. So especially right after the pandemic hit, that was a very tough time to raise capital. It's going to take longer. It's going to take longer. It's going to be harder. You're going to have to make a case for how you're going to make it through to the other side and why your business will survive and be one of the businesses that thrives in a difficult time. That being said, I'll stress this: there will be fundraising opportunities for sure. There is plenty of capital there that is looking for opportunities and understands that there will be very successful startups built now and in the future. And I will point out, by the way, from our perspective, our two most valuable companies, Stripe and Airbnb, were founded in 2009. Or did YC in 2009 anyway, which was an interesting time right after the global financial crisis.
Interesting. We summarizing the feedback on the question about stickiness is, yes, people see actually quite a bit of stickiness. And again, one of their concerns though is around innovation. And actually there's also another question also just about, again, this gets a little bit towards what you were saying, some things better off done in person. I assume some of the magic of Silicon Valley, the magic of YC is around serendipitous conversations and interactions. Does that resonate with you as a concern or a weakness on digital?
I always think of that as the classic metaphor within a business of the water cooler conversation. I guess there still are water coolers sometimes, but where there'd be this place where people would go get a drink of water and they'd sit around. Maybe it was the coffee break room or something, and you'd run into someone and you'd say, "I'm thinking about this," and then 2 weeks later you have a startup and you go off or a good idea for the company or whatever. And yeah, those are a challenge. We've actually been thinking a lot about that as an organization, of how we get people talking more informally. We've actually funded a bunch of companies that are trying to create Zoom-like environments where that sort of interaction can happen more naturally. It's in a typical Zoom meeting. If you guys have all done Zoom meetings with 20 or 30 or 40 people, it kind of becomes a monologue, because it's hard to just recreate where you're in an office and multiple people and you can be off in a corner talking. You can have breakout rooms, but that doesn't work out that well. So there's a bunch of people trying to figure out how to do that. And I do think that is an issue. I do think that in-person matters. I don't know if it's about those impromptu conversations just as much as more so that we take nonverbal cues from people, and you get a sense of them when you're in their presence that you don't quite get over a video. And so I think that will come back, but especially when you know someone, like we've been together dozens of times, it's fine. And way more convenient than hopping in a car or on a plane, getting a hotel, all that stuff. So there's going to be this mix of in-person and virtual that, you know, I mean, it's only going to get better and better, right? It really will. There will be a time when the Zoom, like, you know, we spent 15 minutes trying to get the Zoom environment right beforehand and get the lighting right. That's because our technology stinks for this. It's terrible, and the cameras aren't that good, and the microphones are only okay, and it's not 3D. And you know why? I don't know why I'm not a hologram standing in front of you guys talking, and right, like, you may be sitting right next to you in your room. It's going to get much better. Or maybe it'll be virtual reality or augmented reality. I just got this.
Hey, no product placement, we said. I don't know.
I don't care. You know, this is a, you know, you can get this really cool virtual reality rig that's independent, that's not hooked up anymore for a few $100s now. The whole world is going to change. The technology is moving really fast, and these Zoom meetings will get better and better and better. It's not going to stay still, and we should be aware that technology is going to enable even more change in the future.
You should see some of the new VR cases that we're doing. So I'll do a product placement. So if you think about your teaching operations and you want to take people to the factory floor and see lean manufacturing, it's a lot better to do it with VR than stick people on a bus to some place 60 miles away. So for example, so super cool.
For example, and you know, if you put on one of these headsets, it's pretty cool and pretty amazing, and the resolution's only, you know, decent. It's going to be amazing in a few years. It's going to be amazing. So just wait.
So let's actually, we have a few, I want to pivot to a related topic, but a number of people are asking about geography. So, okay, so one thing, on the one hand, digital in some ways should be making the world flatter and more integrated. And yet if we stand back and look at even before COVID, more nationalism, more regionalism, you know, partly, I guess, prompted a little bit by Trump stirring the global system. But it seems like COVID is also accelerating that trend. My sense is, you know, the Europeans are going to get even more protectionist. The Chinese and the U.S. rivalry. Anyway, what do you make of all that? And especially from a YC point of view, anyway, how much of your batch like is outside the U.S.?
The current batch is between a quarter and a third outside the U.S.
And how do you think about, you know, how do you see the opportunity set, you know, coming from global tech? Do you feel like it's spreading as much as people talk?
You know, the Martin Luther King said the moral arc is long, but it moves in the right direction. And the arc of change towards a global world will be long, and it will move with fits and starts, and there will be reactions against it, but it's inevitable that the world gets flatter and smaller. Look at all of us here doing this sort of thing today. It's way easier for us to fund companies that are in France or in India or in Brazil or Chile or Russia, for that matter, when they don't have to be in Mountain View all the time and fly and deal with visas, et cetera. That's actually going to be transformative for the way we fund companies overseas. I have no doubt that there will be speed bumps on the road towards making the global economy, the global world work smoothly, and we've seen that a lot within the nationalism that's not just in the United States, but in many countries around the world, and some of it can actually be positive. The author Yuval Harari talks about how nationalism is actually, nationalism nowadays tends to be more a pejorative term. It sort of seems like it's a negative thing. It's about disliking the other. But originally it was a super positive thing, whereas you had a village of human beings who who would only care about someone who was kind of related to them almost, suddenly caring about people they don't even know or will never know or will never meet. That's an amazing thing, that if you're in France and you care about other French people who you'll never meet, or if you're in San Francisco and you care about people in New York, like you'll never see those people. So there's a positive aspect to this that I don't think we should lose. And when we can get that on a global sense, that's when the world will really start to advance, when we can care about our global community and not like, you know, there's this awful meme in the United States that when there's a plane crash, you know, how many Americans were on it? You know, none. Okay, then who cares? Well, no, I mean, there's this sense of the other that that the internet, that connectedness can break down, and I think that's a super positive thing, and is a trend that is inevitable, despite some of the pushback that we will also inevitably see. Remember, you know, the pushback against technology and change has been there forever.
Yeah. Again, as I'm pulling questions here, so we have a range of things. Some people are, I guess maybe because I brought up the VR cases, are asking if you have some advice for INSEAD in terms of how we adapt, what we could be doing to be more relevant in the world, maybe more engineers, things like that. Any
you guys never like what I have to say about that, Peter. So, but you know what I said INSEAD is, you know, why aren't you free, and why aren't you opening it up to you know, tens of thousands of people around the world, and then, you know, figure out a way to do an income share agreement so that, you know, put your money where your mouth is and get people great jobs, and then take a little bit of money for the first couple of years and make it for free, and broaden and you know, find a way to have an impact that's beyond just a small campus in Fontainebleau or in Singapore or you know, elsewhere around the world. Get truly global. That's my advice for INSEAD.
And scale, more inclusive and scale. Yeah, that's fair. Well, you know, we're certainly, like other organizations, building more openness on the faculty to digital and digital delivery. So it gets more feasible to move in some of those directions.
Yeah, I mean, this is, there's a one of the things that drives this thinking, it's sort of around the kind of university, you know, we're a university, and we're not a university because we're investing in companies. But at the same time, if you think about what we're doing, which is to help startups be successful, to teach startups how to be better startups, to work with startups, we're sort of university. But when you apply and get into YC, we give you money as opposed to having to pay. And we have funded companies that have similar approaches. There's a company called Lambda School, which is doing quite well here, which teaches people how to be engineers, to be programmers, and eventually we'll broaden from that, and it's free. They just ask people to sign an income share agreement, so people generally get as much as 100% higher income after they go through Lambda School, and so they just have to give a small percentage of that for a couple of years to Lambda School as payment once they get those degrees. It's not unlike taking equity in a company. It's just taking equity in a person. So if you build equity in a person and help them build equity, why wouldn't they be willing to?
I would certainly say, with the benefit of hindsight, we certainly wish we had a share of the equity of our alumni. So for sure, with hindsight, that'd be great. All right, I want to do one last topic with you, Geoff. So you're now president of YC, a real institution in Silicon Valley. And again, one of the things that's going on is there's a lot of, at least before COVID, a lot of scrutiny of tech and what's the role of tech in society. And I think clearly that's, you know, that's likely to continue. There's going to be more concern about inclusion. Certain issues are getting amplified. We see that. So I'm going to launch a quick poll. So I'm going to ask everyone here, you know, just there's a lot of, at least pre-COVID, a lot of things that people worried about, from the effect of Facebook on democracy to loss of jobs and cybercrime. And so we're just asking people, if you had to pick one thing that you're worried about with technology today, what is that? We'll see if we have a big winner. And then just I know you've on the role of tech in society. Obviously there's again, I put this one up because obviously we've talked a lot about the positives and the great new things coming, but just to take a look at this. So here we go. Interesting. We're going to go close in 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. So here we go. Let's take a look. Share results. Interesting. So concentration of power in large tech companies. I also, ex-US, the fact that these are big US companies is interesting. But really, it's interesting, spread across the board. Anyway, curious your reactions to, the role of tech in society.
I wonder if there had been a question that was, I'm not worried at all, it's all going to work out. If anyone would have chosen that one. It's interesting to me that it's the concentration of power in large tech companies that kind of dominated the poll. I tend to worry less about that. It seems like it's not new that for a while certain companies get massively powerful. That's happened throughout the Industrial Revolution, and there's always countervailing forces. And I will argue that technology is, by its very nature, a countervailing force. This could be wrong. I admit that maybe technology allows the network effects that it can create allows a staying power to companies that didn't exist in the past. But I suspect that isn't the case. I suspect that everything's disruptible, and that the companies that are huge now are going to be sort of surprised later. But some companies are just really good and have staying power. Look at Microsoft, right? That's been around for a long, long time, and it has made this transition under Satya
for you, what
very well.
Things you personally, when you think about your responsibility leading tech, what are some of the negatives that might be more top of mind for you?
I think the thing that I worry about most is I guess what you call here job destruction and increased inequality. I think technology gives leverage that leads to sort of natural inequality. It used to be, if you were going to start a factory, you would have 1,000 workers and you would share the results, the value created with that factory, that was the output of that factory, with all of those workers. Now maybe you need 3, and the rest are robots that are building the cars or whatever, and you can keep the vast majority of the profits of the gain in a very small set of hands. And I do think that a lot of what we see in the inequality in the world, which is pernicious and not a great way to organize the world. And for a period of time, there will be job destruction, and some of it is going to be permanent. And how we deal with that over the long term, I think, is a huge question for societies around the world. I think longer term, those are bigger things. I do think that all of these other things mentioned are serious. We call it digital addiction, but another way to put it is, for all of us, we're in the middle of a social experiment. We're all guinea pigs for, how do we live in a world where there's information all the time and your phone is always there, and people are talking about you, and you need to look because it's right now, right? And that's affecting all of us in ways that are very hard to predict, and certainly children. And I see this with my kids, and everyone out there with children sees how it's affecting them. And I think that's a huge unknown. We don't know how the social experiment is going to come out, and there's a lot of studies being done to try to figure that out, but that's super important. And I am concerned about the undermining of democracy. There's this interesting idea.
Things are working great there in America, Geoff.
Yeah. Right. Well, we'll see. Come talk to me in November. But the fact, look, it's super early in this whole set of changes, and this whole fake news thing, and not being able to figure out what's true and what's not true, because anyone can say anything. There's answers to that, and there's ways to deal with that. there are ways to figure out what's true and what's not true. And some of that is education, and some of that is building into our systems ways to, you know, question. One of the things that you all seen, I'm sure, is what Twitter has done to point when someone, for example, the President of the United States makes a tweet, does a tweet that is clearly questionable in terms of its veracity. They point to saying, well, you can check this out. Look at here's some sources. And having trusted sources, there always will be trusted sources, and being able to figure out what's true and not true is a skill in the future world. So I do think that's a concern. Tyranny can be aided by technology, and I think we have to be worried about that as well. So yeah, there's a lot of worries that as we've talked before, Peter, that AI and the artificial intelligence is a tool for great good and potentially great ill. Like many technologies, there's dual use. Nuclear power is the other obvious example of something that can be really great and really devastating as well. And AI might well be at that level of worry, but also opportunity. So I think how we navigate these things is, again, it's a responsibility thing. I think at YC, we take that as responsibility, and we do our best to try to fund people who we trust to at least attempt to try to make the good choices as opposed to the contrary, as they build their companies and build their technologies and, you know, unleash those technologies on the world.
Yeah, so I mean, certainly we think a lot about, okay, who do we admit? And then also once we have people, how can you try and nudge people in the right direction? At YC, do you do anything when you have the batch to try to get them to think about their role in society?
Not as much as I think we will in the future. We do a bunch of things. You know, interestingly, one of the things that we do is the YC network is really strong and powerful, and a lot of the folks who've gone through YC feel a real debt and a sense of gratitude towards YC. So they're always willing to come back and talk to future batches about what it took to get to where they are if they've been very successful. And the founders of Airbnb feel so strongly. They come back for every batch and they open up our batch and they give a talk. And Brian Chesky does this amazing job of talking to them right then about how important it is to be a force for good in the world, not just to build $1 billion company and, you know, get wealthy beyond most people's dreams. That's not the unique goal here, or maybe even that important goal. The important goal is to make the world a better place. And I think from the very beginning of doing YC, we try to impress upon them that, you know, you're part of a community and you're part of a world, and that matters, and that you should pay attention to that as you build your company and as you build your community, and as you think about the stakeholders in your company, which includes that community.
Geoff, I think that was a beautiful finish. So thank you for coming back and giving back to the INSEAD community and sharing your experience in an amazing role in really a very amazing time. So on behalf of the whole audience, thank you so much. And if we could just have the slides back up for a second, we will remind you that the learning and the fun continues. We have a number of things that are coming up, including another great San Francisco webinar with Gopi from the Alumni Association out there, and Oren Zeev, the featured speaker. So lots going on. Geoff's a tough act to follow, but we'll do the best we can. Thank you everyone for taking time with us, and have a good end of the week and a great weekend. Thank you, Geoff. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Peter. Bye, everyone.